Yeah, I've on my wedding ring, on the inscription on the inside, my wife and I have the same inscription. It says, "Great is thy faithfulness," and that's really the story that I want to talk about tonight of my own life. I just felt to share my journey with you tonight, and I'm actually a local Tauranga boy, although I was born in Auckland. I don't like to tell too many people about that because down here, Aucklanders aren't held in high regard often, if I can put it politely. My wife is actually from Auckland as well, though she was born in Canada, but that's a whole other story. But grew up here, and one of my first memories of faith was when I was a Boy Scout. I was probably maybe 10, 11 years old. And we did a cycling trip from Tauranga out to Papamoa, and we had to come back along Welcome Bay Road. And we were all getting really tired by the time we were along Welcome Bay Road, being like little 10-year-old kids. And I remember, I don't know why I remember this, but I remember someone in the group who was one of the leaders saying something about this place. And something in my spirit was kind of registering. I don't know what it was. I think I was a Sunday school kid at that point. So I was going to a Presbyterian church and was regularly attending Sunday school. But when he talked about this place, something in my spirit registered with that. And I've always remembered that, but I didn't know what that was or what that could be. I didn't have the kind of understanding or revelation about what that could be. But that happened around 1971, 72, I think, something like that, which I think the college was only a few years old at that point. So, and then just scrolling forward a couple of maybe 2 or 3 years, 4 years, my dad had the idea of taking us to Fiji for a holiday, and that was because we had an uncle who was a travelling salesman around the Pacific. He was marketing products, and he raved about Fiji and said to us, "You guys should go to Fiji and you'll love it, as a family." So my dad took us. We went to Fiji in 1974, and on that trip, I remember going to Lautoka, which is the second largest city in Fiji. If some of you have been to Fiji, has anyone been to Fiji? Yeah. So Lautoka, it's near the airport, about half an hour. And I remember, as I would have been about 13 at the time, but I remember walking along the main street of Lautoka thinking, I love this town. There's something about this place that I really like. And we all liked that town. And I remember my dad saying, if we were going to live in Fiji, where would we live? And we all said, Lautoka, that's our favourite place. 40 years later, I end up living in Lautoka and working with YWAM. It's amazing. I mean, I just look at that and I'm stunned at how God could do something like that. But there was something, he was laying some other little sort of thing in my heart, even back then, even though I didn't know what that was all about. And I suggest to you tonight that there's things that he's laid in your hearts already from your childhood that will bear fruit later on. You won't know what those are perhaps. But there'll be little defining moments that you've had that will actually come to fruition at some other point, and you'll go, oh, wow, that's what that was about. So just want to encourage you with that. I do have some slides. Now there's a photo of me and my brother with a Fijian guy in the middle. I'm the guy with the yellow toweling hat, which was all cool and trendy back in 1974. And so that was our first trip to Fiji. And that was where I sort of got the vision about the islands. And we loved the Pacific. My mum and dad absolutely loved our time in Fiji. We were only there for a couple of weeks. But we went back again in 75, and my parents went back again in 76 for their second honeymoon. They had a sort of second honeymoon. They went back there. And then in 1977, they were still members of the local Presbyterian church, and they were asked to do a mission trip to Vanuatu, or New Hebrides as it was called back then. So I watched my mum and dad go off in 1977 and do a mission trip to Vanuatu and thought, wow, this is the first time I've ever seen mum and dad do something for other people. It wasn't about us getting something as a family, but it was mum and dad going out overseas and serving. And I went, wow, it really inspired me. I thought, I'm really proud of my parents for going overseas and doing that. And they would spend 3 weeks working in a school in Vanuatu. I had the privilege about 4 or 5 years ago of going to that school and sharing the testimony of my parents and my life in front of that school all those years later. It was like 40 years later. and sharing, that they'd been there. After I shared, so the school is a private Presbyterian school with maybe 300 children, and they take their own church service on a Sunday, so they actually run their own service. And at the end of the service, one of the guys came up to me. He was a guy about my age, and he said, "I remember your parents coming to our school, in that team." And he showed me what my dad had been working on and stuff. It was so cool to go there after all those years and just see what my mum and dad had been involved with. And it was kind of weird for me going to the school because it really felt familiar, because I'd seen all the photos and heard all the stories. So when I arrived there, it was like, "Oh, yeah, I know this school. Yeah, that's how it looks. Yeah, it hadn't changed much." But it was just an absolute blessing that, God overwrote something, and I believe He overwrites things in our lives. He often brings us back to the same place, but it's in a different mode, or it's in a different set, you're in a different place in yourself, and He shows you something through overwriting. He brings you back again to the same point. And that happened to me when I was at a conference in Waiwam in Papua New Guinea, actually. We had to meet Lauren Cunningham, who's the founder of our mission, and Lauren started it in 1960. And we had a leaders meeting with Lauren in Port Moresby. Now, I used to live in Port Moresby. I lived there for a year. I was working for an engineering company there at the time. And I said to the guys, "So where are we going to meet Lauren?" And they're like, "Oh, in town somewhere." So we ended up going into town, and we started driving up this driveway, and I thought, "I know this driveway." And then we pulled into this car park building. I went, "I know this car park." And we walked upstairs, and you wouldn't believe it. The meeting that we had with Lauren was my best friend's apartment when I was living in Papua New Guinea 23 years earlier. It was actually the same apartment. I wasn't sure when I walked in, but then I remember the view you could see from the apartment. You could see a curved bridge over a swimming pool on this side, and you could see there was a manse that was in front of the place, and the view was just the same. If it had been any higher and any lower, it wouldn't have looked the same. But I knew straight away it's Richard's apartment. Now, Richard and I weren't Christians when we were hanging out there. We were drinking beer and we were talking about life, and we windsurfed most of the weekends that we were there. We weren't really wanting to deal with the gospel stuff, right? Although there was a lot of preachers on Ela Beach, as my friend would know, that every Sunday the preachers get out on Ela Beach, which is the main beach in Port Moresby, and they preach their hearts out to many people that come and listen. And Richard and I used to move ourselves down the other end of the beach so we didn't have to hear the preaching. But you know what? To be honest with you, when I walked past that preaching, I was convicted in my heart. I was convicted, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want to own up to it. But I knew that God was calling me. He was calling me back. And when I got saved, I was 29 years old. So it was just after I left Papua New Guinea I got saved. And the reason that it was such a defining moment for me going to Papua New Guinea was that after the mission trip that my parents did in New Hebrides, or Vanuatu, straight after that trip, my dad got cancer, and he passed away within a year of that mission trip. And it completely rocked my world. Here's my father, I was very close to my dad. We were best friends. I mean, not many guys can say that about their parents, right? But I had a wonderful dad, and I lost him when I was 16 years old. So it was devastating. And my dad got melanoma, which was quite rare back then, and no one really knew much about melanoma cancer, but everyone knows about it now. But anyway, when I was 27 years old, working in Papua New Guinea, I got the same thing. I got a melanoma. And I thought it really rocked my world, because at that point, just travelled around, had done my own thing. And that really rocked me, because I thought, if I died, where would I go? I could be dead within a year like my dad was. So, I'm wrestling with this stuff at 27, 28 years old, thinking that within a year I could pass away as well. It absolutely floored me, and it got my attention. God got my attention. It's amazing how it takes things like that to get our attention, isn't it? But that's what we're like sometimes. God knows what He's doing. And at the same time that happened, a good friend of mine in New Zealand got saved. I was best man at her wedding, and after only 6 months of marriage, her marriage it dissolved. It basically broke down, and they separated. And through the separation, she got saved. And she wrote to me about that and how the changes in her life were happening. And I was just really impacted by her story of that. And at the same time wrestling with this whole thing of my skin cancer, thinking, well, what's going to happen to me? And when I got back to New Zealand after I finished my contract there, and she was the only person that made sense to me in New Zealand. I lived in the islands, and then coming back, couldn't really relate to being back home, and it just felt like a stranger in my hometown. But she was the only person who made sense, and I believe it's because God was giving her wisdom, and and I could see she was changing. She was being transformed somehow, and I knew it wasn't her. I knew there was some power outside of her changing her. I knew she couldn't change herself. Like, she could maybe change her mind about things, but I knew it was something deeper than that it was a spiritual thing. And I wanted that for my own life. So in the end, she kind of challenged me about where I was at with my faith. And in the end, she gave me a Bible, and I went home, and I was secretly reading it, but I wasn't telling her that I was reading it. You know how you do that? Like, you don't want to give them too much ammunition, because then they'll say, come to church, or something like that. I said to her, I'll never go to church unless I'm a Christian. And she said, right, that's great, that's good, God will honour that. And then she said to me, I've got the whole church praying for you. And I said, oh, they can do what they like, I don't care, it was all this stuff. So it was like, I didn't have any understanding of what was really happening, but she did give me a Bible, and I did start to read it. And it was a very easy translation. It was the Living Bible, which was quite an easy translation to read. So I was being impacted by it. I was reading it. And that's an encouragement to you when you are sharing your faith, that even if you get a negative reaction or kind of a nonplus reaction, don't be worried, because often the person is wrestling with these things, and they just don't want to show you that, because it would be too hard. Then they would, that you'd suddenly go, oh, it's like, leave me alone. So one night, God was really on my case, because I met a struggling Christian. It was the first time I'd ever met a struggling Christian in my life. And this guy wasn't very happy. And I said to him, so what's wrong? And he goes, my marriage I'm struggling. My wife's not Christian. It's a real battle with the kids to go to church. And I thought, wow, he's being so honest and real with me. It was like the honesty was what spoke to me. I wasn't worried that he was struggling. It was like, for me, it was like, this guy's really honest. I've been waiting to meet someone like this in my life. He's just really real with things. Because most of my friends over the years who got saved was sort of paint a very rosy picture of their faith. But he was a guy who was really struggling, and that spoke to me more than probably all the others put together, you know what I'm saying? So don't be afraid to share in your weakness. That's what I tell people, like, this guy had a huge impact on me because he was being very honest and real with his struggles. He was a Christian, but he was struggling. And it spoke volumes to me. I actually got saved the next day after I met this guy. And how I got saved was I picked up the Bible that my friend had given me, and I just flung it open. And she'd highlighted certain verses in the Bible, and this verse she highlighted was Matthew 7:7. Asking, you'll receive, seeking, you will find, knock, and the door will be open to you. And it was like the Lord really spoke to me through that verse, because he said, you've been seeking me, you've been asking what is the true way to live, you've been searching for me as you've travelled, and it was like a real rhema word to me, that this is your time, like there's been people who've prayed for you, who've encouraged you, and you need to make a choice. It was almost like God was saying, it's all led up to this point. All your life's led up to this point. Are you going to follow me or not? So for me, it was a lordship issue. Okay, it wasn't a salvation issue. So like when I was 19, I went to university, and I had some good Christian friends there. And one night they challenged me and said, so you believe the Bible, we know? And I said, yeah. And you believe Jesus died for your sins? I said, yes. They said, well, why aren't you a Christian? I said, because I knew that it was a lordship thing. I didn't want to let go control of my life. Because I just left home, left Tauranga, gone to Auckland. I had freedom, what I thought was freedom. I was away from home, away from, I could just be who I wanted to be, and no ties, and kind of like a free life as a student in Auckland. And so the last thing I wanted to do was, what I perceived was that God would somehow control me and make me do things I didn't want to do and that kind of stuff. And I had to behave and all that stuff. So I said to them, look, I'm not ready. I can't do this. And I had a really good friend at university who was studying with me. His name was Alistair Gibson. He's an Anglican minister in Auckland. And Alistair really witnessed to me a lot during the classes and stuff. He used to booby trap my desk. He'd put tracks in my desk at university. And we had drawing boards, because in those days, architecture school, we didn't have computers. We had these drawing boards. So he used to put huge, big, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten," and he'd write it in huge letters and highlight it. And he'd have it on my desk when I arrived at uni in the morning. There'd be this huge A1 piece of paper with "For God so loved the world." I've still got them all at home. I didn't have the heart to throw any of them out. I still got them at home. And Alistair he actually came to me one day and he said, I'm leaving university. I said, "Why? You're one of the best guys in the class." He said, "No, God's calling me into the ministry." And I was like, "What? What's all that about?" He goes, "Oh, look, Greg, one day you'll understand," sort of thing. So basically he said, I really feel that I'm called to be a pastor. And he left, and you know what? All of us in the class respected him for that. There was no one, most of us were non-Christian, but no one said anything negatively about him, because he really shared his heart with us. He said, "Look, yeah, I could do this. My dad's an engineer, and yeah, I could do architecture," but he said, "I really feel called to the ministry." So when I got saved, the first thing I did was get an Auckland phone book and look him up. Oh, there's Reverend Alistair Gibson. He's a pastor in Auckland. Do you know what? I've never met Alistair since then. But the last thing Alistair said to me when I was 19, he said, "Greg, you're really stubborn. You won't become a Christian now, but I believe within 10 years you'll be a Christian." Guess what age I was at when I became a Christian? 29. 10 years exactly. So Alistair probably, I don't even know if knew he was prophesying, but it actually was 10 years after that I got saved. So I give thanks for guys like Alistair who were actually in your face, challenging you. It did rattle me. He got me to read Revelation, and it really scared me. I thought, man, this is... You guys probably know more about Revelation than I do. So, not quite sure what I'm going to share, what I'm sharing tonight, but I'm just praying that these sorts of things will speak to you in some way. I'll just go through some of the other things that maybe were significant. Just after my dad died in 1979, when I was 16, shows you how old I am now. In the last year of my school, I saw a poster on the wall of the school notices saying, "Friends of the Pacific. We're an organisation that takes high school children and gives them a taste of working in the Pacific Islands for a few weeks." And I really felt like my dad had died the year before, but I really felt it was almost like my dad was there beside me saying, "You should do this." It was weird. It's hard to describe it, but I just kind of knew that my dad would be pleased if I made the choice to go on that trip. And so I applied for it, and I got accepted to go to Tonga in 1980. That's really showing my age. So in 1980, I head off to Tonga, and I had an amazing time. I loved Tonga. I just absolutely loved my time there. I loved the people. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever done in my life. And most of us on that trip said the same thing. We were mostly 16, 17, 18 years old. So we're all like school kids. But we all said the same thing. This is the most significant and amazing thing we've done. Now, most of us weren't Christian. And you know what? The first week we arrived in Tonga was the week of prayer and fasting. It was the first week of January, which as a nation in Tonga is the week of prayer and fasting, right? For those from Tonga? Yeah. So we had to go to church about 4 or 5 times a day. So here is a bunch of Kiwi kids from the New Zealand schools who are going, "Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to go to church?" We don't even understand what they're saying. They said, "No, this is their culture. You need to respect it. You need to go." So we went to church about 4 times a day for the whole week. Welcome to missions. No. So most of us not Christian. But the leaders of the trip were Christians. So it's interesting. Anglican ministers. The second week, however, was a great week because it was the week of feasting. So after the week of prayer and fasting, they have a week of feasting. So we were invited to all sorts of feasts all around the town. Because by then they realised we weren't tourists, we were actually there to help them. So then they opened their hearts to us. You'd walk along the street and someone would just come out from nowhere. "Come to our feast, come to our feast." And you'd come along to a feast and not another feast, So many feasts. And of course, when you go to a feast in Tonga, you have to do a speech. So we were like, oh, we have to get up and speak for like 10, 15 minutes in front of all these Tongans we don't know. So that was quite challenging for us. But what I'm saying is the seeds of mission were planted when I was on that trip. The seeds of something, and my parents doing the trip to Vanuatu a few years before were planted. So when I got saved, I really wanted to somehow do mission, but I wasn't sure how that could happen. But I met some guys from Mercy Ships. I don't know if you guys know Mercy Ships. And they came and spoke to my home group. And I was challenged by my home group leader. He said, what's stopping you going? Because the guy in the Mercy Ship said to us, who here would like to go on the ship? And I just was so enthusiastic. I'm like, yeah, I want to go on the ship to the islands. And he goes, my home group leader said, what's stopping you? And I said, well, I haven't got any finances. I've got no money to go on this thing. In fact, I'm in debt. I'm actually in debt. So I don't know how I'm going to get there. Anyway, I prayed about it. And as I prayed, I felt the Lord say, just keep reading your daily reading, because I was reading through the word, like the word for today. You just read verses each day. And I felt the Lord say, just read your reading for today, and I'm going to speak to you about something. So my reading for the day was Acts 28:11. After 3 months, we set sail on a ship that wintered in the island. Right? That's the first part of Acts 28:11. And it went bang, it just hit me. I'm like, wow, I think this is God. Because I knew the DTS was 3 months, and then you sail. So after 3 months, we set sail on a ship. I'm like, wow, this is really specific, Lord. I don't know, is that really you? Is that you, God? And I prayed a bit, Lord, you'll have to confirm it somehow. And later that week, a friend of mine said to me, what's God been saying to you recently? And I said, I think he wants me to, I don't really know, but I think he might want me to go on this Mercy ship. And she said to me, yes, he told me that a couple of months ago, and this is for you. And she handed me a white envelope. And inside the envelope, I didn't want to open it up when she gave it to me. I went home and opened it up. It was a check for $3,000. So I rang the office on Monday. I think it was the weekend she gave it to me. I rang the office on Monday and I said, look, what do you need to actually join this training school and go on the ship? And he said, you need a deposit of $3,000. That person who gave me the money didn't know that. They just felt the Lord say, give this guy $3,000, he needs it. So she was obedient to that, and that was the catalyst for me going and getting involved with YWAM. So no money, and I was also in debt with the bank, but in the last sort of couple of months before the school started, I got blessed with a whole lot of work and ended up paying all my debts off. But I still was down $3,000. But they let you go on the school if you only had half the fees. So deposit was enough to get me in the school. And by the end of the school, I still owed the money. But that's another story where I actually ended up doing some work for YWAM, and they ended up calling it quits because the work actually added up to about the money I owed them. So in the end, it was all squared off and I didn't owe anything else. So yeah, God was so faithful with that. And then one day I'm driving along Welcome Bay Road. This is about 2 years later. I'm driving along Welcome Bay Road, and I glanced across at the Faith Bible College sign, and it stood out like neon. It was like, and I'm like, well, I've driven past Faith many times, and I was like, nothing's really stood out. But this time, for some reason, this day, it just stood out. And I was actually driving around to see a friend of mine in Welcome Bay, and I said to her, I think the Lord's been speaking to me about some more training. And she looked straight at me and she said, it's not YWAM, it's faith. Just like that, just out of the blue. She's very prophetic. Not YWAM, it's faith. And I said, how did you know? I've only just got that sort of sign that I got this afternoon. She's like, no, it's faith. And then I kept praying about it, and I went to see Peter and Camilla Whiteley, who I think Carly will remember them, Camilla and Peter Whiteley. Peter was here in maybe 1979 or something. Anyway, as soon as I arrived at Peter's house, the first thing that he talked about was Faith Bible College. I hadn't even mentioned anything about it. He just starts talking about it. So I'm like, I think this is God. Then my pastor said, I don't want you to go to Faith. And I went, why not? He goes, oh no, we can do training with you here at our church. You don't need to go. And I'm like, this was a challenge, because I felt God say, I want you to go. But now my leader's saying to me, I don't want you to go. So what do you do with that? So I prayed, and the Lord said, you need to honour your leader. You need to lay it down. Because I didn't know the timing, see? So I just had to lay it down. I laid it down said, Lord, I really feel that you're wanting me to go to Faith, but I'll listen to my leader. He doesn't think I should go. I'll just leave it with you. Within a couple of weeks, my pastor came up to me and he said, have you heard about Discovery Week? And I said, no, what's that? He goes, well, you can go to Faith Bible College for a couple of days and you can live on campus. Do you guys still do that? Yeah. And so I went, and Steve, this is my pastor, he's telling me, so you can go to Faith and you can live on campus for a couple of days and see what it's like. I think you should do it. I'm like, oh, you've changed your tune. No, I didn't say that, but I'm like, you've changed your tune a bit in the last couple of weeks. Maybe God's been speaking to him, I was hoping. Anyway, so I went along to Faith and had a wonderful weekend. And he said, I'll get together with you at the end of the week. When you come back, we'll talk about it. So when I saw him next, he looked at me and he said, you're going, aren't you? I didn't say anything. He's like, you're going, aren't you? So I said, yes, Steve, I'd love to go. He goes, yeah, that's right. It's of the Lord. So just a lesson in obedience, like just a lesson in, you can get the right word. But, there's a right order and you need to sometimes just wait upon God. And, when it's of God, it's right, isn't it, all around? And even your non-Christian family will say that it's right. So when we ended up going to Fiji, my brother, who's not a Christian, said, it's right for you to go. You should go. So, when it's of God, it's right. So he knew. He said, yeah, now it's the right time. Now, I had another issue. I didn't have the money again. I don't know why God keeps doing this to me. So what happened was the day, I'm pretty sure it was either the day or maybe a day apart, but I think it was the same day. I got 2 letters in the mail. One was the acceptance for Faith Bible College, and the other was a letter from my grandmother's lawyer to say that I'd received an inheritance of over $20,000. Because I'd bought a section in Tauranga the year before, so I was paying a little mortgage on that. So there's no way I could go to college and also pay the mortgage. So I said, Lord, I don't know how this is going to work. How am I going to go to Faith and pay the mortgage? And that letter arrived, I think it was the same day, which basically gave me $22,000, which paid off the mortgage and paid the deposit for Faith. Isn't God good? It's amazing. It's just simple obedience, isn't it? It's just simple obedience. I didn't know how it was going to happen. I just knew that he wanted me to go. So I'm like, oh, well, Lord, it's like, just step out. And he provided faithfully. And then at the end of the school, I still owed Faith some money. Sorry, Charlie. And then I prayed about it, and God said, you've got a caravan you could sell. I had a caravan on my section, and I was going to live in. That was my plan, not God's. And anyway, you wouldn't believe it, like about a couple of weeks after I finished Faith, I get a phone call from a friend of a friend. Hey, do you want to sell your caravan? I'm like, it's interesting, you should ask me that. So he came around, he said, yeah, I'd like to buy your caravan. And I prayed about what it was worth and everything, and he actually offered me the same figure that I got in prayer. And so I sold it to him, and that paid off my faith fees. Thank you, Lord. So I managed to pay them off, yeah. So the Lord, just amazing how he provides, incredible ways that he provides. And then I thought I was going to meet my wife at Faith, but that never happened. Many people come with the expectation that they're going to receive their husband or wife. And I was hoping for that too, because I was 34. So I'm like, oh, I need to meet someone. But no, it wasn't God's plan. And within 6 months after leaving Faith, I met my wife in Auckland. And I knew straight away, I don't know, it's very different for everyone, isn't it? But when I first met her and talked to her, I knew that I was going to marry her within probably 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But she didn't know. Anyways, so I said to Karen, my first 2 questions for her were, do you like sailing and do you like the Pacific Islands? Because I needed to know whether she could live, because I always felt God was going to call me back to the islands, but I just didn't know when or how, but I needed to ask her that. And she said, I love sailing, I love the tropics, she said. Hawaii was her favourite place, so it's like, okay, that's cool. You've ticked the boxes, so yeah, I'll carry on. So, scrolling forward a number of years, we've had 2 children by then, and I'll tell you that after I left sort of Faith, I still wanted to do mission, but God said, I don't want you to, I want you to stay put. I want you just to grow and where you're planted. And I had a prophecy in this very room, the week of presbytery, the last week of school, and I had prophecy about going into leadership in sort of a church setting. And you wouldn't believe it, a week after I leave Faith, I'm offered eldership in my church. And I was only 34, and single, so I didn't think it was ideal, but they said, no, we really want you to come on eldership. So I ended up really getting established in a local church and ministering there. And I'm thankful to Faith for the skills that I learned to minister. It was really great. So, but then I still had this missions heart. I still had this desire for Fiji, and didn't know how that would happen, or whether I would ever go back to any of the Pacific Islands. But in 2008, I met a guy in my church. How much time do I have? I'm not wanting to go on forever, but in 2008, I met a guy who came to my church, and we really clicked. And I said, why do I really feel like you get what I'm talking about with missions? He goes, well, I was in YWAM. And I said, okay. So we kind of had this connection with YWAM. And I said, let's organise a trip to the islands. Let's see if we can do a mission trip. So we eventually did a trip. 2008, we went to Fiji. And when I landed in Fiji, I really felt like I was coming home. It's something in the spirit. I didn't really know what that was about, but all I knew was that I really felt like I was home for those 2 weeks we did the mission trip. And it was during those weeks I was praying, Lord, what are you saying? And he said, well, Lautoka was the place that you graduated on your DTS, which is true. We graduated in 93 in Lautoka. And he said, that's the place I'm calling you back to. That's the place that you left off in YWAM, and it's the place I want you to come back into. So Lautoka, there was that whole deal as a 13-year-old and not knowing what that was about. And basically the Lord said to me, I want you to come back here with your family and do missions here. And so I had to go home, and Karen was like, oh, how's your missions trip, honey? And I said, you better sit down. Because I really feel God's spoken to me about going back to Fiji as a family. And she said, I knew this day was coming, she said. I knew some point we were going to go overseas and do something in the islands. So at least God had prepared her heart. And she was like, well, she'd never lived in the islands before, so she didn't really know what it was going to be like. And it was hard for her, like the first few months. And I was like, Lord, I see my wife's really struggling here, so why are we here? And he said, no, it's because of Karen that you're here. And then about a week after that, she came up to me and said, I really want to do DTS training because I see, the changes that are happening to people. I really want that for my life. So we ended up going back to New Zealand, and she did a DTS here in Tauranga, and then we went back to Fiji. And we lived up in Fiji for 5 years full-time, and then 2 years part-time. So we were a 7-year journey in Fiji, and absolutely loved it. We loved everything about Fiji, the people and the culture and stuff. And during Fiji, that time I really was stretched in leadership. So I just came to do the training school, which is the DTS, as some of you know, the basic entry-level school, and staffing that. And then after that, we were asked to lead a school. And during the first school that we led, the leaders of the base said, we're leaving and going back to New Zealand. So I sort of became a base leader as well with a number of other. There was a team of 4 of us who were leading the base. And then after that, the Fijians decided nationally that I was to be the national chairman of Fiji, which is like, and I said to these Fijian guys, I know why you guys want me to be the leader, because you just like the Palangi or the white guy to be leading, right? And they said, no, it's not about that. It's about your giftings. We really feel you're the right guy for this season of the ministry, and we'd like you to be our national chairman. So I came from being just a guy serving on the base to actually being the national chairman in about 3 years, which is like horrendous growth and stretching to the max. And I did that for a couple of years, and then the Lord started speaking to us about moving back to New Zealand. So that was all happening in 2015. And I had a couple of people prophesy who didn't know me. They just were visiting the base from overseas, and they said to me, you're moving into a teaching ministry. Your ministry here is finishing, and you're moving into another type of ministry. And it's going to involve teaching. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, because I had been doing very little teaching. And then I started getting offers from other bases. Can you come and speak on this school and that school? and started to do a little bit of teaching in Fiji. And that continued when I got back to New Zealand last year, because I then prayed, long story, but we were going to go to Turkey after we left Fiji. So I'd been over to Turkey for the Anzac gathering, which is a big conference we had, and I was really excited about Turkey. I'd always wanted to go and do missions in Turkey. It's not an easy place to do missions, but really felt that was where we were supposed to go after Fiji. So we came back here last year planning to go to Turkey, but God in his ways are not our ways, and he completely redirected us as a family, because we were encouraged to pray about this as a family and talk about it with the children, because we did a family ministry school last year in Matamata, and we just had time to reflect on our journey in Fiji as a family, and we got our children involved in the direction we were going as a family, and we said, what do you children want? And they said, we just don't want to go to a place and then have to leave in a hurry, or we want stability. That's what they really wanted. And I knew that Turkey wasn't that stable. And then of course, actually the night that we decided not to go, I turned on the news and it said Turkey poised for a state of war. That was the headline on the computer that night. I'm like, okay, Lord, I get this. We're not going to Turkey, right? So anyway, so I said, well, Lord, I don't want to go back to my job. I don't want to just come back to Tauranga and go back to work after all that amazing stuff that we've done in Fiji. And Lord said, no, I've got something else for you. And I wasn't sure what that was, but I heard through the grapevine that there was a frontier mission school that YWAM was planning on running, YWAM Bethlehem. We'd actually hosted some of the teams from YWAM Bethlehem up in Fiji, so we kind of knew a little bit about the base. We were really impressed with the calibre of the leadership of the teams, and they were a pleasure to host for us. And I heard somehow that they were going to run a frontier mission school, and that had been my desire, was to be involved in frontier missions. And so I met with Sam Chang, who some of you may have met, and Sam said, you're just to answer the prayer. And I said, why? He said, well, we haven't got anyone who's had overseas experience to be on staff. None of us have lived in a developing nation. And so he said, I'd love you to come along and be part of the school. So Sam said, well, you can just work with me on the school. And I said, yeah, I'm happy just to be your number 2 or whatever. And then just before, a couple of months before the school started, Sam contacts me and says, we're going back to America. With our baby, there's a problem with my wife's pregnancy. The baby has an abnormality, and we're going to go back to the US. And so you're going to have to lead the school. So I ended up having to lead the first frontier mission school for YWAM Bethlehem. And to top it off, not only was I leading with no experience, but we only had one student. Did you guys know that? So the January school that we started, some of the stuff, no. We only had one student, and I said to Josh and Marty, are you seriously wanting me to run a school with one student? I said, I wouldn't run a school if it was my choice. And they said, no, Greg, we want you to run with one because it's the word of the Lord. It was a real lesson to me in don't worry about small beginnings. Because I was feeling really kind of awkward running a school with one. I had 3 staff, by the way. So it's a little bit outnumbered, right? 4 of us to 1 student. Anyway, one of the staff was redirected to the DTS, so then there were 3. There were 3 staff and 1 student, and we started. I know, it's crazy. I go, what is God doing? Is this supposed to be a joke or what? 1 student and we're running a school? You can imagine the reaction of some of the speakers that were coming. Oh, how's your frontier mission school? Hey, how many students have you got coming? 1. So it's a little bit embarrassing. And one of the guys actually said, I'm not coming for 1. Oops, he said, I'm not going to come for 1. So that was all right. But all the other speakers said, yeah, we're coming. We're coming. So that was cool, it was great. But 3 weeks into the school, I get an email from a German girl who'd done her training here the year before. And she's like, I want to come to the school. I know I'm late, but I really want to come. So we prayed about it. Yep, we felt that she's supposed to come. So we had 2. I doubled the school. Hallelujah! 2 students. We ran the school with 2 students. The 2 students and one of the staff are now in Nepal, and they're there for 2 years. That's the fruit of that. And we're sending more people. There's more people wanting to go to Nepal and China next year, and we've already got 4 or 5 applications for the next school. And this next school doesn't start till January. We already have quite a number of people interested in going. But it's just a lesson to me in obedience that don't worry about the numbers, the circumstances around that, but just get the word of the Lord. And Josh and Marty, to their credit, had really prayed about this and really felt that this was the way forward for us as a base. We needed to run the school because we wanted to partner with Nepal, with the base there. And so it's another lesson in actually trusting your leadership as well. I talked about submitting to authority, but also trusting authority, trusting that I wasn't familiar with the story of why we're in Bethlehem or what they were really trying to do, but I just trusted Josh and Marty that they actually had the word of the Lord for it. And they said, Greg, we want you to run the school. Just run it. Okay. Felt awkward, but hey, just go with what the Lord's saying through leadership and just trust the Lord's in that. And so amazing fruits come out of that, amazing fruit. And we're really believing that next year is going to be a really good school, big school. This one was great too, even with 2 students, it was wonderful. We were in the little prayer house, the little medium-sized prayer house there, and as a student, I'd actually spent quite a bit of time praying in there, so it was really cool to be back in the little prayer hut that I'd been at Faith 20 years before, and running a little mission school there. It was a real privilege to be back. It was kind of weird to be back at Faith, because when I left Faith, I never thought I'd be back here. To be honest with you, I thought, I've done my 1 year at Faith, I'm out of here. And I had no plans to come back and be here. But isn't it amazing how God brings you back to the same place again for something else? So that's kind of been the story of my life, is going back to the same place again and God overwriting it in some way, like he did with Fiji, went back there again later on in life. Like that with Papua New Guinea, came back to meet Lauren in the same apartment that my best friend lived in, things like that. So God, I said to the Lord about that apartment, I said, God, this doesn't mean anything else to anyone else in this, it doesn't mean anything to anyone else in this room, because they don't know the significance of this like I do. And I said, Lord, why did you do this? Why did you arrange for Lauren to be in the same apartment that I used to hang out in? You know what he said to me? He said, I just wanted to show you that even when you weren't looking for me, I knew all about you. That was very humbling. As I say, I was actually trying to run away from the Lord, avoid these Ella Beach preachers, stay away from any Christians or whatever, just drink beer and talk about life. But it was like God actually was showing me that I know all about that. I know all about your weaknesses. I know all about your journey. I know every detail of that. I just want to leave you with that he knows all about your struggles, your trials. He knows all about your journey, and he's already placed seeds in your life that will bear fruit, that were way back in your life, that maybe you at the time didn't think was significant, but there was something about it at the time, you sort of maybe discarded it, but they will come back again. Nothing's by chance. I really believe that. Nothing is by chance. He knows all the detail. And if he knows all the detail, how much can we trust him? So much, if he knows all the stuff that's going to happen to us. And he knows our lives from beginning to end. And why wouldn't we trust him? But we struggle with that, don't we? Let's be honest, we struggle with it. But all I can tell you is that great is thy faithfulness. Great is his faithfulness. And he's been so faithful to my family and myself with finances, provision, amazing. One time we were in New Zealand, just wrap it up, but one time we were in New Zealand and Karen, my wife, said, how are we going to get back to Fiji? We've got no money. And I said, well, if God wants us back there, he'll arrange it. A few days later, I get a phone call from a friend of mine. He says, are you guys going back to Fiji this year? I said, yep. He said, have you got your airfare money? And I said, nope. So he said, okay, I'm going to put some money in your bank on Monday. And he put like $3,000 in my bank account. So it's just God's faithfulness. Like if you're, where he guides, he provides. Where there's his vision, there is provision. It's true. But you just get the word of the Lord. Don't worry about your finances. Just get the word of the Lord. Trust him for that. It'll probably come in a way that you least expect, but it will come. Okay, it might come late, or what you think's late, but it comes at the right time. When you look back, you go, yeah, that was the right time. A few nods here, so some people have been through this. So it doesn't get any easier, I think sometimes you think, it's just, you have a season where you get really good provision, you get comfortable, but then I think the Lord often lifts that a little bit just to keep us sort of going back to him rather than to our supporters. And he also showed me he provides in ways that I haven't thought about, in amazing, different ways, unusual ways he's provided for us. So I just want to leave you with that he will provide for you, some of you who are struggling financially or whatever. And he's so faithful, and he also just loves to lead us into what we love to do. Like, I always loved going to the islands, so he actually combined my love of the Pacific with mission. And he will do that for you too, your passions, things like that. He can use those things. So thank you for tonight. I hope I haven't been too long. I'm not sure how long I'm supposed to be. Thank you for your viewers who are from overseas as well. Thank you for watching. So bless you guys, and trust him for everything in your life. Amen. Amen.